All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. My name is Greg Undo. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia area, just outside Washington, D.C. And if you want to, feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field. You can tell us where you're from. If you're watching this live, that's very helpful. If you're watching this offline, you don't necessarily have to introduce yourself for the live session. So, and if you're watching this offline, you may want to skip ahead maybe to about 10 minutes after everyone gets logged in, and we'll get started. If you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask the questions in the comments field and just tell us where you're from. It's always kind of interesting. And we'll get started maybe in about 10 minutes. For those people watching offline, we're going to let people get logged in and start watching. Just get my Cubase open here. And we're just going to check to make sure sound is going through okay. All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start collecting some questions. And I'll just make sure we get hear this audio before we get started. Okay, so all right, we're getting some questions from people from all over. So let's take a look, see who's online here. And I'm gonna mute my feed so it doesn't feed back. We have always a little bit of delay going on between the transmission and the and what's being going on in real time. So we kind of need an ASIO driver for the Google Hangout. Okay, I'm just copying over some questions. And again, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. We're getting some people logged in. All right, so we have from New Jersey. Greetings from, I think it's AOL or ACL. All right, so we have Sal online. Good to see you, Sal. All right, so we have Hong Kong. We got together once. A lot of fun. Sweden. All right, we have Taylor from Pine Grove. All right, we have Paul back online. Good to see Paul Brown. We have Ireland, France, New Jersey, and again, people are just getting logged in. All right, so we have Mo from Reading, Pennsylvania. I have a cousin who lives there. All right, Romania, Mission Viejo, California. Reunion Island. All right, we have Charlotte, North Carolina. All right, we have Trevor from England, Oregon, the UK, Houston, Romania. We have Greg McCarty back on from Portland. Good to see you. All right, we have Canada, Italy. Okay, see a question about chord track. We'll take a look at that. Okay, so a question on Groove Agent. All right, we have Stanley from Poolsville. Good to see you online. We have Brazil with a question about is there any discount coupon for Cubase artists available? It's very expensive for us in Brazil. There might be some promotions coming, so just kind of look, just keep checking the Steinberg website for some promotions. We're kind of, Cubase is 30 years old, so there might be some promotions coming on in conjunction with that. So, okay, we have Edinburgh. Okay, so we have a question from Scott. Any plans to allow Cubase to repeat a 12-bar clip ever? I think it's pretty easy to repeat, but I'll try a couple things, and if it doesn't make sense, just let me know. All right, so we had a question before we get started about ARA 2 support. So they've announced, that it wasn't coming in at 10.02, but that it'll probably be out in sometime towards the end of May. So look for it for that. All right, we have Patrick from Sacramento. So question for Greg, is there anything about Cubase Nuendo you don't know? I'm still learning new stuff all the time. So sometimes I force myself to get into, I have a lot of time traveling for work. So sometimes I'll just kind of make myself learn new things on a plane or train or something. All right, we have Denmark. So I continue to learn new things every day. Okay. Okay, just getting some questions and we'll get started here. Thanks for all the great questions, everyone. Okay, so see a question on reamping with Kemper. Okay, so seeing a question on adding inserts with Q-Link. Okay, so we have people from the Netherlands. Got together for a weekend once when I was in Hamburg for a business trip. Okay, so we have Germany, Norway, Orlando. Good to see you, Vinny. So question on when is Wavelab 10 due? I'm sure they're working on it now. I haven't heard of any release dates for it. All right, we have London. Okay, we have a question on RevX. And we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions. All right, we have Belgium. All right, we have San Francisco. Just there last month or in March for Game Developers Conference. Okay, so question from Sweden. All right, Netherlands, China. Just getting kind of caught up here and some of the questions copying over. All right, so we have Iowa. Good to see Dennis. All right, France, Germany. So the question is, in Italian Symphonic Orchestra, are all the instruments positioned as they would be in a modern orchestra? Yes. All right, we have, that's from Taylor. We have Sherman Oaks. All right, we have Savannah, Georgia, beautiful city. Been in Sherman Oaks a number of times. Okay, we have Russia, Italy. Okay, Ranger track question. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll get started. Now, catch up with the other questions as we kind of go through. I'm going to copy over one more. Okay, and then we'll. Okay, so we'll see a comment on from Dennis about a brief overview of Dorico. We'll see if we have time towards the end, but there are dedicated Dorico hangouts as well. So we may not get a chance to do it because we have a lot of questions. So, but we'll go ahead and get started with questions that we have currently. So let's go ahead and start off with some of the earlier questions that were sent in. Okay, this is a question that came up in a Facebook group, and I think it was asked by Paul, who was on the Hangout, but it was how to have tracks not follow a global transpose. So if we have our different tracks set up to do a global transposition, let's say if we have something, maybe tracks like this. And if you're not familiar with like the transpose track, what you could do is you can add a transpose track. And what this would allow you to do is to kind of globally choose to transpose your music at different parts in a project window. So if I just come here, we could say, let's go to -3. So as we're playing back, when we get to that point, all the music will just transpose the audio and MIDI down 3 semitones. So now you may not want the drums to globally transpose in that scenario. So what you could do is if you actually select like your drum and percussion, you know, you may not want MIDI drums, for instance, all, you know, transposing because they could fire off the wrong notes. So as we want to do here is we could select those events and then we could set the global transpose here to independent. And if you don't see that, you might just have to make sure that the follow global transpose function is enabled here. So we could just simply turn that on or off to see if that's visible. And then as we do a transposition, we could have the drums not transpose. So those will maintain the pitch as we go into our global transposition here. And then if you want to do something creative, you could also just kind of bring this up slowly back to tonic. So you could say we start at -3, go to -2, -1, and then you could slowly do. We'll transpose up again. Back to your original key. So that's how you could do it. So make sure that when you have the events selected, and you would have to select the events, that you set the global transpose here instead of follow to independent, and that should do the trick. So you could play around with different keys, you know, of a song and just see how they work harmonically. We also had a question dealing with, let's say, if we have a number of projects, like adding a number of inserts directly to a particular, you know, direct offline processing. And if you haven't been using the direct offline processing, Even with the 10.02, there's some significant changes with the direct offline processing that can make things a little easier. So let's say if I wanted to come here and I had, let's say, a track open up with some, I'll just add a quick audio track here. And let's say in this particular track, I had some inserts. I wanted to run just a little bit of, let's say, magneto and maybe grungualizer. So let's come over here. We'll add the grungualizer. This is always an oldie but a goodie plugin. So if you wanted to add some like crackle, and we'll get rid of some, hum. So you just want to add some of the crackle to drums. And let's say at this point, I wanted to go through a bit of envelope shaping. So at this point, I will have this going on, and we'll just adjust our release and length and the attack up a little bit. So let's say if I was just playing back my particular drums, I had a number of drums going on in my particular session, and I wanted to process all my drums together. I could now just go directly to my inserts here, go to the direct offline processing. And what the direct offline processing will allow you to do is to basically process a number of different, sample editing functionality as well as plugins directly onto the files, and you could undo that. So with version 10, we added the ability to have different banks of favorites, but now we could populate all, if I wanted to take all the particular inserts on the track and apply it to selected files, I could just drag my inserts from my mix console and now have those all completely processed. And now it's going to process those offline. And if I wanted to change the order, I could just come directly here. Or if I wanted to take out one particular process, even after saving the file, I could just say, let's take out the grungualizer, but I could keep everything else completely intact. So if I have a number of inserts and I quickly want to apply those, I could just simply drag these inserts directly to my direct offline processing and have that applied and then bypass the inserts. Or we could drag it into a preset here and give the preset a name, and now I could call that up for any other function I want and have access, and it will go through. And even 10 years later, I say, let's just tweak the magneto plugin here, and it will recalculate all the processing needed to be done. Or I could just say, let's delete all of the offline processing. So if you have like a DSP powered plugins where you have a finite amount of resources, that's a great way to kind of get around that. So now just kind of drag and dropping inserts directly into your offline processing as well. So I'm just going to go back to our next question. So we had a question that someone wanted to use cycle markers and have this completely filled in. So let's go back to our previous project that we had here. And what they wanted to do is have markers and kind of fill the space in with the cycle markers so that it was a bit more apparent for the arrangement to be visible. So as we come here, we could say we're going to have, let's say, our intro, verse, chorus, and we can see that we can have cycle markers, and they'll be kind of indicated with this green, light here, and we could add cycle markers based on range. So if I wanted to come over here, we could add, up to 10 separate marker tracks. So if I wanted to create another marker track, and let's say if I just wanted to grab my range and say, this was intro, at this point, we could just set, or let's say if I'll just come here, I'll hit the letter P, and we could add, I'll just delete my errant cycle marker. And then I could add a cycle marker there. I could come here and hit P again and add another cycle marker like so. And we could kind of continue to do this, but the customer wanted a more obvious way to have these markers kind of fill in the entire area. And if you want that, you could, another great choice is to just use the arranger track. So even if you don't use it for nonlinear arrangements, we can now just define, our verse, or let's say intro, verse 1, verse 2, and these could be relabeled just by holding down Alt or Option. And at this point, you could just do like intro. And again, just come right over here. Let's type in verse 1. So even though a lot of people would think of this as being more for doing non-linear arrangements with the arranger track, you could use it and define, not only different colors for the arrangers, but you could also just kind of come over here and have that kind of more solidly defined visually for the arranger track as well. All right, so a question I got was mailed to me was how to copy a range with automation and tempo easily from one part of a song to another part of a song. So let's say if I wanted to come here and I had, let's say on my kick drum, I had some automation going on. Some very bizarre automation for a kick track. All right. And let's say if I had also some tempo changes. So I'm going to come here and just add a tempo track. All right, so let's say I have my tempo track. So if I wanted to copy very easily all my different parts, I could just, if you have, let's say, marker tracks set up, one easy way of doing this is just kind of set the range. And let's say if we have, a marker track set up, let me just find my marker track here. Okay, so I'll just copy my marker track up to the top here. Just so you can see it visually a little easier. So if I have automation and tempo data, I could just come directly here to the marker track. And if I wanted to just double click, let's say if I have a marker here and a marker here, if I have my range selection, I could just double click between the two markers, and this would kind of globally select everything. And now I could just drag this and make a copy by holding down the Alt key, and we can see that this would include all of the automation plus all of our tempo changes. So that would kind of do a global copy in a very easy way. So kind of using the marker track with the range selection tool, you could just double click and that would select the entire range, start to drag, and just hold down the Alt or Option key and let go, and you could copy again, with all the automation and all the tracks, plus all the tempo information very easily. All right, we had some questions on how to best utilize the notepad. And the question was they wanted to exchange data to someone who wasn't running Cubase on like almost like a track sheet. So they're wondering if there was a kind of a virtual track sheet functionality, and we could do this directly with our notepad. So if I wanted to come directly to my tracks here, each track has a notepad. So here, if I wanted to go directly to my kick track, I could say, okay, I used the AKG D112 and the snare. We could say, SM57 top. And let's say the hi-hat, we used, AKG 451. And, let's say, you just want to put different mic choices, as say Sennheiser 421 on your toms, whatever. If you wanted to, go down to the bass, we could, you could also just go directly to, different functionalities. So you say this was this particular synth patch, and as we want to go directly into the mix console, let's say if we go to the full screen mix console view, we could just kind of click directly here and we could now show the notepad data. So excuse me, I'm just going to hide one thing here. It'll make the screen wig out for a second. All right. So now as we do this, we could now see, as I scroll over, we could see all of our different notes that we have. We could also just enter in notes here. So we could say, for the bass, this was, radial DI, Fender Jazz back pickup only. So we could do notes like that and see that directly within the project. Now, in previous versions, one of the things that was fixed, that was brought up in a previous Hangout, was if I wanted to see my input and output channels, like if I had my stereo out and this had a note on it that it was brought up in a previous Hangout that this was causing issues and it wasn't showing up when we go into our full mix console view, and that has now been resolved here. And what's really kind of cool about this is we could just simply at this point say we wanted to export, and from our project window for here, we could go to File, Export, and you could export the notepad data. So let's say I just wanted to come directly to this. I'll store it onto my desktop temporarily, and we'll say save. And now I could see all of my notes that's just exported as a, directly as a text file. So at this point, you could have all these notes and be able to pass that on to someone who's, maybe not slick enough to be running Cubase at this point. So if you haven't played around with the notepad data, definitely kind of check it out. There's a lot of great stuff you do to kind of keep notes during your session that could be passed on with the session, or, to other people, or just being able to archive. Because I've had to, I remember when I worked in the studio, we had to pull up some classic disco hits from, 15 years earlier. And, having, and this was the early 90s, and being able to have access to all the session notes, was really important in being able to do a remix for a film. So we had a question that was sent to us, is how to see the input levels of a track to someone who was having a hard time determining like the gain structure for mixing, or rather recording and tracking, because they would see the meters only kind of represent what was happening after the, post fader. So, and, they're frustrated that they couldn't accurately set the input levels. And what you want to do for particular tracks is if you right click in the meter area, so just to the right of the fader in this black blank area, you could right click. And at this point, you could go down to, I want to go to global meter settings, and you could say the meter position, set this to input. And now you're going to see the input signal versus the post panner or post fader. So at this point, just right click, go to global meter settings, and then you could see your meter position and you could adjust it directly there. So that's how you could determine what tracks, what the input levels are going directly into your tracks. All right, we had a question from the Hangout today. I have AI6 version when I bought my Motif XF7 in 2015. Now I want to reinstall it on my new laptop. Is that possible? And then we'll get to this. Any plans to allow Cubase to repeat a 12-bar clip ever? So we'll show you how to do that. But yeah, you can basically go to your My Steinberg account and ask for a license. It's like a license reauthorization. So if you just go to your My Steinberg account where you registered, you could just say, there's a whole process for taking your Cubase AI license and be able to, generate a new license for your new computer for your soft E licenser. So go to your My Steinberg account and you could do that quite easily. All right, so we have a question. Hello, my EQ setting resets after opening same project. Thanks. I haven't come across that, but we'll go ahead and just give it a quick test. So I'll just do a new project here. I'll add a couple audio tracks. And let me adjust the EQ on each of these. Okay, so now we can see if I wanted to go into my full mix console view, we can see all the EQ changes. I'll go ahead and we'll save this project. And let's close this. Okay, and let's go to my recent projects. We'll test this. I haven't run into this personally, but we'll go ahead and look at the mix console. So it looked like all the EQs came back without any issues. So, and this is in 10.02. So, maybe if you have the ability to, indicate which version it is exactly that you're using, that maybe perhaps, it's an earlier version, but I haven't heard of the EQs not recalling. And, if you wanted to send a project to us, we could take a look at it as well if it's okay. So next question, why is it when you duplicate regions on a chord track the inversions change? All right, so let's go ahead and we'll create a quick chord track. All right, so we'll do 3 chords with inversions, and we'll see if we get this to will be harmonically correct here. Okay, so I have 4 chords here, all with inversions, and I'm just going to hold down my Alt key and copy. And those, let me just reread the question and make sure. Okay, so I just copied, and that seems to be fine. Let me duplicate. So, and when I duplicate, it seems like all the inversions are still sticking kind of as expected. So, you know, if you have a project, you could send it along, but it seems like that's working fine. And maybe if you're duplicating it, a different method, just let me know in the comments. Okay, so so we had a question on, you know, how to have Cubase repeat a 12-bar section, and it seems pretty straightforward to me, but I'll just go ahead and let me just open up a particular project where we could do a 12-bar section. I think this was maybe with doing like guitar solos over it on top. So let's see if we could. There's a number of different ways of doing this. So if you have 12 bars, yeah, let's say I just switch this to bars and beats, and now I just wanted to come here and I will split, let's say at bar 12. And if you wanted to copy this over and over again, so I'll just select these events. You know, it's pretty straightforward to, you know, if you just grab the center edge here. Oh, let me just get rid of these down here. So I have like 12 bars of data. And now if I just grab this right center edge, you could just duplicate like that and play a long guitar solo. That's one way. You could hit Control or Command D for all the selected parts. So that seems pretty straightforward. All right, and if you want to do another method to duplicate that, is again select all the events, and if you hold down the Alt key and go to the lower right hand corner, you could just drag out on your timeline. So it seems pretty easy to duplicate the 12 bars, but if that doesn't make sense or doesn't work in your situation, just let me know and be glad to take a look at it. Also had a question about using kind of, you know, the beat step sequencer in Groove Agent 5. So if you have a particular instrument here, let's open up Groove Agent 5, and this will be the full version. So I'll just open up a kit here. And let's just open this up like this. And now when we wanted to go to our pattern, and I'll select a pattern pad that has nothing on it. Let me just find let me just me just find some other presets here. So I'll do like worst drum beat ever. Yeah, let's just kind of come over here. Let's put in some 30-second notes. You can adjust your velocity or other controllers. So that's just one easy way of kind of building up horrible beats. I'm not a beat maker by any means, but that's a way that you could kind of use and program different beats directly inside of, Groove Agent 5. So that makes it for a very kind of simple way to have one tool that can have that as a pattern. And if I really like that particular pattern, I could just drag this directly onto my arrangement, and you could just come over here and again copy and duplicate that pattern without this playing. So now So I hope that makes sense. We'll continue on with some of the other questions. Okay, so we had a question on reamping with the Kemper. So as soon as you want to use, reamping is a very popular method. I think it's actually used in this particular project here. Or I'll open up a project that has some reamping on it. So we get a quick idea. And reamping is often when you take a recorded guitar signal. Let's say you mic someone's amp, but you also record, and it's often very cleverly taking someone's guitar signal without them realizing it and recording a direct signal that you could run through an amp afterwards. So if I wanted to listen to So with this, I could, if we listen to our guitars, let me just see if I have the right project here. I may have. I think this one I did some reamping in. So with this, they recorded the guitar amps, but they also recorded they recorded the direct guitar signals. So if I just wanted to bypass this. So if I wanted to just do this, and what we've done now is I ran the VST amp rack as a plugin. So if you wanted to incorporate external hardware such as a guitar amp, a great way to set this up is to go to your audio connections and go to external effects. So you could add an external effect, and what you want to do is probably have it be a mono in mono out. And what you want to do, and we'll just go ahead and call this Kemper. And we want to just literally define which inputs and outputs it is connected to from our audio interface. So we're going to just connect that into our audio interface to available ins and outs. So this is where, if you do this a lot, having more ins and outs gives you a lot more flexibility. Now, when I go to my inserts, I would go to external plugins, and then I could just open up my Kemper right here. Now, one of the key things is by the time the signal goes out and back in, what you need to do is to have it automatically, it could impose additional latencies, but Cubase is smart enough when you click on this button to automatically ping the signal and will delay for the outboard latencies. So now when you instantiate that track is now going directly through the Kemper's input. The output of the Kemper is now going directly into the signal, and you're effectively reamping just doing it like that. So you can have a lot of flexibility. So it's always great to have a direct guitar recording as well as the amp signal, because then you have a lot more flexibility in being able to reamp or run it through different plugins, and you can still make the guitar player happy if perhaps if you don't like their tone for the track, and you could fix it. And sometimes guitarists, people could be very emotionally tied to their tone of their amps, and if it doesn't fit, then you could reamp it very easily, often without letting them know that you're doing it. So that's an easy way to kind of reamp. So again, go to the studio, to audio connections, VST connections if you're running previous versions, and this is found in the Cubase Pro. Go to external effects, add that, set the routing input and output, choose your external effects such as your Kemper, and then compensate for the latency, and then you could very easily reamp. All right, so question: when using QLink, how can I insert a plugin without it opening all the channels at once? All right, so let's take a look. I think we might be able to solve this with a preference. So let's go to a new project. All right, and I think this is Taylor's question. If we come here to my inserts and I have Quick Link activated, and I now want to insert let's say a compressor. So I'll come here, let's say I want to now, we'll just do the vintage compressor. And now it's opened up the vintage compressor and all those tracks now they're Quick Link. But now the plugin interface has opened multiple times. And I think that's what Taylor's trying to prevent. And I think if we go to your preferences, if we go to project and mix console, just think that there might be a preference for this. Okay, so maybe if you uncheck, I'll give this a try, but I think under preferences, the VST to plugins, to open effect editor after opening it. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this, and now I will put on a different plugin for, let's say I want to put in a frequency EQ on all those channels. That will now open and instantiate all of those particular plugins on that track without opening the plugin interface window. So again, if we come here to preferences, to VST to plugins, and now once I enable this again, I could click apply and I open up a reverb plugin. It's now going to open up, multiple instances of that particular plugin. All right, so we had a question. I'll skip ahead one question, but we had a question on the RevX reverb. So the question is there a way to see the numerical value for the mix slider? Doesn't look like there is a way to see it, but you could kind of get a idea. Let me just see if there's some. Doesn't look like there's any indication other than kind of graphically to the percent, to what the numeric value is. So you just have to kind of gauge it, gauge it visually. You could save it as if you needed to have the same exact instances or the same exact settings for different tracks. You could save it as a preset, and that would be included. So let's say if I come here, I'll save a preset, and we'll just check. We'll call it check mix level. Okay, and I'll go to another preset. And we'll see if this is incorporated. So now I'll go back to my check mix level preset. And that's automatically stored. So while you can't see a direct numeric representation, if you needed it to be exactly the same for other, for other tracks or other sessions, you could save that as a preset. Okay, so we have a question: why no triplet snap in the audio editor? So I think we could do this. It may not be as easily discernible via. So let me just drag a drum loop in. Just see if I could get a beat. Okay, so let's say for now I have my particular, and let's say I'm in the sample editor. Okay, so let's say I'm going to try it first. We'll just try, let's say, quarter note triplets, and then I'll make sure that the snap is turned on. So let me adjust to bars and beats here and use quantize value. So now we can, snap the positions directly within that. So, but let's go ahead and give it a try with some of the warping stuff. So it looks like that might be set to non-triplet values, but you could also try experimenting with, the grid here. So if you wanted to, let's say, adjust, just so as you wanted to adjust here, you could, have it, snap directly to the editor. Let me just see if I'm missing something down here, but I think that, you could still have it, even though it doesn't look like it's, you could have the snap value set to, like here we have it set to quarter note triplets. If I set it to, eighth note triplets, you could have it kind of set there, but I don't think it really carries over into the sample editor for warping, but I'll definitely kind of pass that on. All right, next question. I'm just going to make sure everything is okay with our stream here. I'm just going to check some audio, make sure. Okay, so sometimes we have audio goes in and out on the Hangouts, so it's kind of a bummer. All right, it says I have Cubase Elements 10. I need to know how to make an audio file from MIDI. I want to EQ from all the drums. I think it's better and more visual than the EQ in Groove Agent. You know, you can kind of achieve, very similar things inside of, either way. And it's really pretty, so, MIDI itself obviously doesn't have a sound, doesn't transmit a sound, but it could be a little confusing with, Groove Agent. But, if you want to take, let's say if we have a Groove Agent SE open, and I'll just go ahead and open up an instance of it here. And this is the one that comes with Cubase Elements. Let me just go ahead. I think I'll just load up a quick acoustic kit. Once you're running, let's say I have just like a beat playing here. I'll slow the tempo down. So if I wanted to EQ the sound coming off from the drums, we could go to the mixer itself and you could adjust. You have 4 bands of parametric EQ that you could adjust here. You could go to, to the master. And if you wanted to, just come here to the EQ, you can say, okay, I want to do my studio EQ. And this could EQ kind of the whole kit globally. But if you want to EQ the kick separately from the snare, you could just come, directly here, and you could route these to, different outputs. So let's say I want my kick going out of my master. Let's say I will take kick to output 2, snare to output 3. And if you do this, you may want to just go to the plugin itself and activate a number of outputs, but you can see now it kind of gets updated for you. So let's say I want output 4, output 5, and output 6 for room and overhead. So when I go to my mix console, at this point, I could just grab, my different elements here. When we look at our settings, so if I wanted to just EQ the kick or the snare in this case, or just come here. Let's say we'll just solo this to listen to it. Then you could EQ each one independently. So, and these are the same EQs that you would have whether they were audio or MIDI. So if you run to the position where you think you have to render it as audio for EQs, just simply you could bus it out here. And this is for an acoustic agent. So when you have an acoustic agent, you could kind of see the instrument here. If it's a beat agent kit, so let's say if I come here and it's not a, let's say if I'm playing back a particular pattern here, let me just start this fresh because I don't have any of the outputs. It's slightly different if you're using a beat agent kit. So now when I want to play, let's say we have a particular pattern. I'll just turn this down slightly so it doesn't kill you. So if I go to a pattern here and I wanted to EQ different parts, I would go to the instrument. And then you could set this to different outputs. And then as you have that going to different outputs, I could just, again, EQ just that particular. So with a, dealing directly with a beat agent kit, when you select the pad here, you could, if I wanted to take my hand clap to a different output, so each one of these could be routed to different outputs that could be EQ'd independently. So, the EQs you could do it internally or just simply route it to multiple outputs, slightly different ways with an acoustic agent or beat agent, and still have kind of all the flexibility without having to turn it into MIDI. All right. Okay, so a question, why when you use a tempo signature of 6/8, the MIDI, it says grill, but I assume MIDI grids stays to 4/4. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. So if I add a signature track here, so let's say if I make this 6/8, and it could be that perhaps you don't have the tempo track activated. So, it seems like that is kind of working. Seems that kind of is, make sure that one, you have the tempo track activated. If you look at the click pattern, make sure that also, it could be that the click pattern is set to 4/4 in 6/8. So, but by default it seems to, do the grid to 6/8. All right, so we had a question, explain how to manage a Ranger track when it comes to film scoring. So let me just open up a quick project. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. All right, so let's say we're doing maybe kind of orchestral type project here. And we wanted to incorporate kind of, arranger tracks. There's some cool things you could do with a arranger track for kind of film scoring context. So I will add an arranger track. An arranger track, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, will allow you to do kind of non-linear arrangements. So let's say if I just wanted to select different sections of my piece here. So we could have our different arranger events. Then I could just do kind of non-linear arrangements of this. So say we'll have this. And instead of it playing back straight linearly through, what we're able to do is to experiment with different arranger chains. So I could activate this. So we'll go A, and it's going to repeat this A section. Then it's going to jump to C. And I messed up some of the key switches, obviously, here. And then, so you could have kind of multiple versions, you know, maybe you'll have different scenes that will be set up as an arranger change. And, you know, you could call this, you know, as a film composer, you could say this is outdoor. This is, you know, sunset, and you can hold down the Alt key and double click, and you can say, you know, this is fight, and you could arrange these in kind of non-linear manners if you wanted to musically. And to now take this and make it into a non-linear arrangement, I could just click on a little drop down arrow here, and then you could choose to flatten the chain, and that would copy all the parts off directly as if it had a traditional linear arrangement of it. So, all right, we'll move on to some other questions. Thanks everyone for patience, and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so let's go through questions. Okay. So I see a question, is LE the same as Cubasis after upgrading? So I'm not sure if that's originally from Cubasis LE or Cubase LE. So maybe if you could reiterate that question so I could understand a little better. Sorry. Okay, so I had to reload Cubase. I lost all my connection to PreSonus Fader. How can I revive it? So probably if the PreSonus was probably, I assume, probably working as a Mackie control. So to have that come back to Cubase, what you'd probably want to do is go to your studio menu, to studio setup. In previous versions, it might be device menu to device setup. Click on the plus sign, and then you could just add like a Mackie control and set the MIDI input output ports exactly where your PreSonus is connected, and then it should probably kind of snap to. So if you have a fader bank that has, you know, 24 faders or 16 faders, you may just have to activate 2 or 3 Mackie controls with the different MIDI ports to make that work for you. So again, to get your control surface working, go to your studio setup, and then click on the plus sign here. You could select your particular, and I assume it's probably going to be Mackie control. It's probably a pretty universal protocol for control surfaces, and set the appropriate MIDI ports, and then that'll probably do the trick for you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we have a question. What's the difference in MIDI functions between reverse and mirror? So let's go ahead and take a quick look, see if we could figure it out. I'll just do a new project. Okay, so we'll just... Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look at this, and I will just duplicate that 3 times. So we have kind of the same data here that we'll see 3 times. So I think it might have something to do also with rhythm. So let me just adjust the rhythm on this. I'll just quantize these very quickly. So we'll come over here and I'm going to set up a better scenario here. Hang on 1 second where it's not going to be. Okay. Yeah, they look pretty identical still for me. I thought one might handle it. I could do a I could play around with that, but they do look kind of similar to me. So, all right. So we have a question: upgrade Hallion Sonic SE to Hallion promotion. So with a smiley face. You know, sometimes they don't run promotions on stuff that you didn't necessarily buy, since Hallion Sonic SE is bundled with with Cubase, but there are different Hallion Sonic promotions. There's a big Absolute 4 promotion that went on, so there are promotions throughout the year. Okay. Okay, so we see in the Flux arpeggiator window, what does the function of C1? Nothing in the manual about it. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. Open up a Flux here. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the arpeggiator here. Okay, so I think what this is going to do is like where if I hold down, let's say I'm just going to open up a MIDI keyboard. So let's say if I just come here and I'm just going to play a chord. So this would be controller 1. So at this point we could have, different controllers. be able to adjust. So let's say if we wanted this to be pitch. So now as we would play a particular chord, I'll just see if I can find a little nicer preset here. Okay, so if I just turn on activate this, so let's say our velocity. So just go to the okay, so I'm gonna play a chord in. Just find something a little. Sorry, wrong instrument. But I think that would allow you to have that same type of okay, so I'm gonna go to the arpeggiator here. So we can say we want velocity. And now we go to, you could have this be your filter envelope for control. So, and you could have this be, you know, if you wanted to do panning. So this would allow you to have your continuous controllers that you could control directly from here. So as we play. So that's what that's going to allow you to do, is to have kind of not only the different velocities controlled. So say if I come here, let's just do completely different arpeggio. So let's do this as level. So this allows you to have your different types of parameters that you are adjusting here. So in addition to just your velocity. So that's kind of what the C1, C2, C3 allows you to have access to kind of shape the sound a little more. We have a question. Alan Silvestri, if you're not familiar with him, he's a kind of a well-known film composer who just did Avengers Endgame. So he used that using Cubase and Darko. But the question is, says he relies greatly on Cubase macros. Are you familiar with the macros? And could you briefly touch on some of your favorite macros? You know, there's a lot of macros that film composers make. You know, and there's like, you know, I kind of make macros for a lot of different functions. Like if someone can't figure something out, like how to do a cut head or cut tail, a lot of times film composers may take, I'll show you, like, especially using kind of logical editor functions. So let's say if I wanted to add an instrument track here. Let me just find a particular. I'll just find a more generic string patch here. So let's just look for. All right, so let's say we have quickly some, and I wanted to create just one. So let me just come here, and I'm just going to split this. Okay, so now so let's say we have like a pattern like this. Okay, and you know, a lot of times what, you know, like I was just like I think it was just the week before last, I was spending some time with Hans Zimmer, and it's always interesting watching like his macros, because what he'll do often is just create like logical editor presets, and he triggers these and can make, you know, things happen. So we could say type is equal to note. Then you could do stuff like context variable, or let's say last event. Let me just see. There's one clever thing. Let me just see if it's under context variable. But you know, you could come over here and create macros so that if you see all of the same velocities, you know, you wanted to take, you know, value 2 of a note, and at this point, you know, you wanted to change value 2 and subtract, you know, 17, you know, values of a particular note. So there's lots of stuff, and they'll also get into points, and we have kind of a whole logical editor YouTube tutorial on a Q&A section, but you could also do stuff like, you know, select every other note and adjust the velocity. You know, extract the velocities from this and copy it to another note. So those are things that the film composers do kind of all the time. And a lot of them will have like specific touch screens just to call up a lot of logical editor presets. So, you know, if you come here, you could see a number of different, you know, you want to add ninths to the chord, select the highest pitch of a chord, you know, to transpose that. You want to extract, delete the minor sevenths. So these types of things that you could do with the logical editor. So that's probably what a lot of people do, in setting up kind of custom conditions where you may do the same type of edits over and over again. And this is where you get into macros as well. And these are generated from key commands. So I wanted to like come over here, let's say like I want to add cycle markers based on locators, or I wanted to, you know, copy the continuous controller informations from one part to another part. Instead of having to do these, you know, these types of things repeatedly over and over again, you could create your own macros to kind of speed up the workflow. And when they have such, film composers have such huge projects, speeding up their workflow is really everything to them. Okay, so go on to the next question. So is there a way to turn off preview in Media Bay when opening a track preset? So when I come here, let's just say if I have track presets, I'm going to So if I come here, let's say if I have an audio track, and I drag a track preset directly onto that track, it doesn't seem like it's previewing the track preset. Let me make sure I'm reading the question. So the track presets don't seem to be instantiating. And maybe this is for a virtual instrument. So, if you wanted to come here, let's say to VST instrument track presets, I think it will just kind of, load up that particular instrument to preview. Let's see if we get that. I think that's probably what you're talking about. Let me see if there's a preference for that. So I don't know a way to not have it on, but I think as it's loaded up that, you could just drag and drop, and that the instrument's kind of loaded up for you. So as soon as I come here, that's going to just create that track preset. But let's say if I open up my, not that, let me just come over here to my VST instruments. Okay, so as I do this and I select that track preset and load it up, I think it's taking the same amount of time as if it's loading up an instrument, but I don't see a way to disable the track presets for VST instruments automatically. Okay, what's a quick way to zero out all the faders, like when gain staging? So let me just add some additional audio tracks here. And we'll go to the mix console. Let's say these are all off and we wanted them to jump to 0 dB. So if you have quick link turned on, I think if you just click on the fader itself while holding down the control key, just try selecting all these faders here. All right, so let me try just switching this to absolute. So if you have quick link turned on and you want the link to be in absolute mode, so I will just go ahead and let's say we have something like this. So enable quick link, select the channels, and then you could hold down like control, I think on Windows, or command, and that will jump you to the default value of 0 dB. So if we have it set not on, and I have these kind of linked accordingly like this, we could have the, suspend, so when it's in that mode and we adjust, we could, adjust kind of, we have quick link enabled, we could adjust that, but if we set it to absolute and then just hit control or command for one of the faders, that will set all the faders to 0 dB. All right, so we had a question for Bezier curves for MIDI automation, please. I think it'll be coming, but if you do have, let's say, a MIDI track going on and you have, let's say, what a lot of people have kind of gravitated to is, let's say within the part itself, You have, let's say modulation. So if you have that modulation, you could go directly now and go to your CC automation setup, and then just turn, like, as soon as you go to the record destination, just switch that over to an automation track. So as soon as I come here, and I think if we come right here, you can say extract MIDI automation. And now once you've done that, you could go to the automation lanes, and now you could adjust your MIDI CCs accordingly. So I know a lot of people have kind of just gravitated towards this methodology. And now once it's in automation, at this point, you could do your Bezier curves just like that. So again, if you go select MIDI and then go directly to extract MIDI automation, we'll see this. You could turn that directly into automation, so you could have your Bezier curves for that. So we have a question: any plans to create profiles that can save audio connections? I think that I've passed. We'll take a quick look at it again and see. Let me just see if it's some things it makes sense to do audio connections, and sometimes it may not. But I'll just take a quick look. Hang on just 1 second. So if you're not familiar with profiles, what they're allow you to do is to kind of save like presets and what you would need to do to carry over your system to another system. And that's really kind of the intention. So if you're going to another system, it could be that they don't have this, well, you may want the same keyboard shortcuts, and you could access these, directly from, you could save, import and export, I think, from the project menu. So you could have, different profiles. But if you go to a different computer, your profile may not work if it's, you can see your profile manager here. So that may not carry over, and you could cause trouble if your profile had, and you wanted to kind of work as you did, and you had everything mapped out to 24 outputs, and then you have a stereo output on a computer that you're importing the profile manager to. I'll definitely kind of pass it along as an option, but there's some caveats with that that could cause problems in the system that you're importing into. So that is probably the design intention behind it, but I could understand the desire for that. Okay, so we had a question about shared copies. So let's say if I have a MIDI part here, and if I hold down the Alt, and I think it's plus Shift or Option plus Shift, we can create a shared copy. And what this is going to allow me to do is, as I would adjust a note here in this particular editor, that note reflects in this shared copy. So as I would just move particular notes, we would see these changes react directly in here. So I move these notes down. This note, this part is reflected of this. So, and let me just, it might be under edit. Let's see if there's, but there is a way to convert to, if you just go to functions, and then you could just convert to real copy. And now as I make a change here, it's not going to reflect the change here. So if you want to make a shared copy, hold down, the Alt plus Shift key, and this will be reflected. And if you wanted it to be turned into a real copy, just go to functions, convert to real copy, and then it will function independently. All right, we'll move on. Some more questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. All right, importing AAF, OMF doesn't keep the fades, but slice them. Any update in that? Let's go ahead and I'll just try a quick audio file, and we'll export it as an AAF. I'll just do a new project. All right, so let's say I'll just throw in a quick atmospheric type file here. And I want to do, let's say, a long fade out. We'll do that, and let's go ahead and we'll export as AAF. Now I'll go ahead and import the AAF. So it looks like the fades carried over directly there on that particular file. So like the fade was written in. So I don't see it necessarily slicing. So if you run into that, make sure that you could always make sure that you import and export into the same program and see if that's carried over. But it looks like the fades translated and didn't create slices. So, give it a try, because it could be depending on what program you're importing into, and AAF can always be a bit of a moving target. So, but and again, this is in the 10.02, so it's the latest version. Okay, so we have a question. When you duplicate MIDI notes in the key editor, it doesn't keep the spacing. Like if you have 3 notes in a bar and you want to control D, it duplicates after the last note instead of every bar. Okay, there's a kind of an easy fix for this. Let's go ahead and delete those files. And this is where a good use of the in-place editor. So I'll do new project here. right, so let's say I have a 1-bar event here. Okay, so I'll create an event. Just create an event 1 bar long, and we want this event, as we look into it, I want to put in quarter notes, like 3 quarter notes. All right, so what often happens is if you're in the MIDI editor here and we just duplicate, like Control or Command D, it just does the particular, it won't take into account the rest. So if I want this to start on beat 1 of every measure, it'll just take those notes, and it won't incorporate the time, but it incorporates the events themselves. So as you duplicate, you get 1 beat off. So to kind of mitigate that, what you could do is open up the in-place editor. So if you wanted to come here, and you may, I think it's Command Shift I, and this is kind of your in-place editor. So if you grab the range selection tool now and select the range and then duplicate, you will then have that space automatically carried in, because you could select the range of data as opposed to the particular note events. So again, you could just go to your in-place editor, and if you don't, you could also just have this. If you go to your track control settings, you could say edit in place, and then you may just simply see this particular keyboard, this little icon that could show up here. So let's say if I go to my track control settings, we'll say edit in place, we'll add that. This becomes an icon. So if we make this a little taller, you could immediately take that to the in-place editor and then use the range selection tool for the in-place editor and duplicate that. And that way you could keep the space between, you could duplicate that range of time and not just the MIDI events themselves. Okay, so the question is, LE the same as the regular after updating? So when you update from LE to the other versions, you still have the LE version, and that will have, not as many features as the full versions, but you have the full version. So it doesn't necessarily take the LE version up, but you have the license to run the more advanced versions with more features and functionality. Okay, let's go through some more questions. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. Okay, so I'm just looking for... Okay, so one question I just saw I missed. Let me, it's an automation question. It's from Greg. Sorry, I missed this one earlier. It was about an automation question. So let me open up an audio track. And it says, when I select all on automation track, it doesn't include the 2 ends of the track. So when I change volume, the ends don't change. So let's say if I have an automation here at the beginning of this particular track, and let's say at the end of a particular track, And let's say I have automation data going on here. So, and it says when I select all on the automation track, it doesn't include the two ends of the track. So when I change the volume, the ends don't change. I think it's kind of, let's see if we select outside of that range. But if it looks like if you select all, let me just try this again here. I'll just do so it looks like, if I just double click while holding down shift on all of these, that it will select all those events, and then I can move the ends kind of like that. So that seems to be kind of functioning. So maybe depending on if you're selecting the range, but when I just select, shift and double click, I could select all the automation. And when I grab the automation node, they all seem to change correspondingly. So give that a try, Greg. All right, I'm just going back. I was looking for one question. It was kind of referencing an earlier question that got cut off. Um, okay, so in its question says Bitwig allows a clip to play while recording in solo or jamming on a standard audio track. So, if you have cycle mode turned on, and it says, sorry about the question being cut off earlier. So check to make sure that if you're in cycle mode, the part that you're recording multiple cycles of will be kind of one long audio event that's kind of expressed in different lanes. So maybe, Scott, if you could reiterate your question, that would be helpful. Okay, so we have a question. Having an issue with the tempo of my samples when importing from Media Bay to a sample track. Okay, so when you have samples here, if you're having tempo problems, make sure that the samples themselves are matching with your sample rate of your project. So it could be that samples that you're dropping in are 48K, your project is 44.1, or 96K going to 48 or 44.1. So to me, it probably sounds like a sample rate mismatch. So check to see if, that is set, and there may be, I think there's a preference when we come here to, you could say on, and you could also check this preference. So if you go to editing audio on import audio files, where you could say convert and copy to project if necessary, and that could adjust the sample rate. That might do it for your sample track as well. So I would give that a try, but it sounds like a sample rate mismatch to me. So. Okay, so we have a question. I don't think, I'm not sure if there's a way to do this, but we'll take a look at it, see if anything's changed. I haven't tried it in a little bit. It says, hi, Greg, is there a way to, when you add or duplicate a track in a project that is not added to all visibility configurations? Thanks from the Netherlands. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. We'll do new project. Okay, so we'll just kind of do this a couple times and we'll set up some different visibility configurations here. Okay, so we'll try this as one. Let me hide these particular tracks first. So we'll so let me just call this one 2. All right, so now if I wanted to switch between my different visibility options, we'll come here. All right, so let me add an audio track. And we'll give it a name. Click on add track, and let's see if it's updated in all of the configuration. So it looks like it's still there, which I thought. So let's say, yeah, so it looks like that still is kind of functioning. I will pass that on as something to someone, for someone to take a look at. So it's still behaving the same way as previous versions. Okay, so we had a question, can we talk about using Cubase Live? So lots of people will use Cubase Live. Really interestingly, Donny Osmond has kind of run his whole Las Vegas show for 8 or 9 years, I think, running Cubase for all the parts, where all the cue mixes, the lighting, the video, everything is being kind of run through Cubase. What a lot of people do also is, if they have a set list, and a lot of times, you know, artists will change the set list every night, is they can make one, you know, and they may have, you know, some tracks that are augmenting. Is I've seen a lot of people will set up each track, each song in a set in a linear fashion like this. Also, a lot of people use it for, you know, playing virtual instruments live and have all the program changes. You know, there's a lot of the Hans Zimmer tour was done in Cubase, and they're very happy with how that turned out. But if you have, like, let's say a whole live set here, and you wanted to be able to switch these around easily, is that we could define each of these as, we could use the arranger track functionality. And I will just kind of come here and we'll say this is going to be song 1, song 2. Hang on just 1 second. Just had to check something. Okay, so these will be labeled as the songs of the set. And it doesn't really matter like how much space is between. So if you So now that we go to our arranger track, I'll just go to show all tracks here, and we go to the inspector. So let's say this is our set. And now the next night we wanted to have a different order. we could just come here, create a new chain. And now you could have these different chains that could be different set list. And as you do this, you could also have it with markers. So you could say play to end of part, play to next marker, jump to next part, and have a foot switch actually control navigating between different songs through a generic remote. So there's a lot of great ways of using Cubase Live for doing stuff like that. Okay, so we had someone checking in from Serbia. All right, so we had a question from Bahrain Island. Let's see, when will we be offering the amazing paraphernalia mugs and shirts for this region? I'm not the best person to ask. Yeah, I just work for the U.S. distributor for Steinberg, and I think it's really up to the different distributors in their countries of where they want to bring in kind of different merchandise. But you could definitely. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I will kind of bring that up to the person that does kind of the the shirts and hats and mugs and stuff like that. So I wish I had a better answer for you. All right, so let me just go through. All right, we have a lot of questions and try to catch up. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. I just when I thought I was doing good on questions, and I refreshed it, and now I have a zillion more questions. Okay. Okay, it says, I have just one question, which seems a mystery. When I upgrade Cubase from Elements 9.5 to Pro, will Pro Act be a separate version running aside Elements? Thanks a million. I think when you go from like a 9.5 to a 10, you have the same. You would have both versions, but I think when you have 9.5 and you upgrade to Pro, that I don't think that the Elements license will continue to work, but all the Elements functionality is inside of Pro, and so I don't think you'll have a problem with that. So I don't think it'll. So the license, I'm not sure if the license will still work. I haven't done that personally, but I see someone else indicating that it's a separate version and you can keep your old version, but I'm not sure if the license will currently work with that. Okay, we have a question why sometimes Waves server works with Cubase and sometimes not. I don't think there's anything we could really do on our end to do anything differently with the Wave server. You may want to check with them. All right. Okay, so hi Greg, is there a way to export separate events on the same track as multiple files without having to rename them one by one later? It'd be useful to build sample instruments. Thanks from England. So if I have, these particular events here on a track, and let's say I had these in kind of for a non-linear fashion for sound design, I'll just excuse me, I'll just go ahead and delete these. What I could do is, there's a couple different ways you could do this. One is just to, select these, and if you go to edit, just to render in place, and you go to the render settings, and we could choose to render these as separate events. You could do this. You could also have, if you wanted to do naming conventions, So let's say we'll just come here, and we could have it be dry and just choose to render, and it'll take all those files. And just rename. And I think that there are some other potential renaming options. I know Nuendo has some really slick Nuendo, but just try playing around with your render settings here, um, and that would allow you to kind of export those and have those go to a specific location for you quite easily. So we have a question. I have Cubase Studio 5, can purchase just the upgrade. I'm not sure if you could still upgrade from Cubase 5 at a discount because it is probably over 10, 11 years old now at this point. So you may want to, but you could always check on the Steinberg website. When you go to Cubase, you go to steinberg.net and just click on shop, and you can see if there's upgrade options still available. But it might be a little too old. It can spend 10 or 11 years. Okay, so we'll go through some more questions. Is it possible to use chord track live like Arranger and using marker as main fill intro? Yeah, we have a lot of people that we use the chord track where they will, take an entire project out and then they'll put the tracks into live transform. So if we have, let's say, an instrument track and we have this going on, at that point, if you go to the chords, we have a lot of people that would just kind of go out here and put it into live transform mode. And then at that point, you could just, play MIDI in, and the whole track can kind of follow the chords that you play. Okay, we have a question. Explain device setup and how to optimize Cubase to work best in each situation. That's kind of a broad question. But let's say we go to device setup or studio setup. The main things for performance that you want to be concerned about is when you go to your VST audio system, you want to make sure that, ASIO guard is activated. Probably most of these will be set to the default. Most of the computers have multi-processing. You could select the interface and come here to the control panel and adjust the buffer settings as well. So if you adjust the buffer settings accordingly, and you may have to adjust the buffer as a project grows really, really large, you may have to raise the buffer, or if you're tracking initially, you may want to lower the buffer. So it really can vary. But again, for getting things set up, go to, your studio setup here or device setup. Usually these will be kind of default settings, and check the buffer size of your audio interface, and that could look slightly different for every audio interface. You may have to go to a control panel and adjust the buffer size. So we have a question. Can you talk about how to control Omnisphere as a rack instrument? I don't use it. I don't have it on my system, but it should, show up just like any other VST instrument. So let's say if you open up like Halligan 6, and once you have this open, it shouldn't make a difference whether it's a rack or a instrument track. Again, I don't have that particular instrument on my system, but kind of opening it up would be the same. And once this is open, for instance, like within Halligan, I could have up to multiple MIDI ports as well, so you have up to 64. If you're running as an instrument rack, you have 64 MIDI channels within one instance of the instrument. And setting to multiple outputs would be kind of the same for all of your different instruments. So it's really no different running that as any other plugin. Okay, so it says we have a question. Greg, I'm still not seeing the sections part in the chord pads in the lower zone. Do you mind going through the process? I might be doing something wrong. Okay, so we'll go to the chord pads here, and some of this is changed slightly. So if I wanted to come here to the editors, so let's say we just I know it's changed slightly in this particular. So when you see the go to the edit, and then when you come here, you can say filter notes, or you can see sections as well as pattern mode. So you could just kind of come right there and activate the sections. So make sure that you click on the edit within the chord pads. So you see the chord pads like this, and then from the player modes, instead of playing chords or patterns, just choose sections. All right, so I see a question. If I add a tempo track and insert a 2/4 bar and then return back to 4/4 Groove Agent, timeline is never synchronized to timeline of Cubase and sort of can't trigger a pattern at its beginning. What I would do in that situation, because sometimes, depending upon the pattern, it may not be able to adapt accordingly to different patterns. But, what you could do is, if you have, let's say, a Groove Agent SE pattern here,